Hello and welcome to this Money Control interview with Sir Martin Sorrell, the founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital. Always a pleasure
Good
talking
to
to
see
you at Davos.
And catching up on India at Davos, yeah.
Right. But
Seems most of India is here. Actually, the inauguration or here?
I have to start by asking you about Trump. January 20th, today is also inauguration day plus
Yes.
the first day of Davos.
And Martin Luther King's Day as well.
Right. Now, Davos was, a product of a different world, the heydays of globalization. What's the role of Davos going to be in a post-Trump world?
Well, it's an interesting question in the context of what you mentioned about globalization. I don't think globalization is finished, but it's definitely not where it was under Ted Levitt, Harvard Business School, if anybody remembers who Ted Levitt was. I think growth is going to be more tempered. I think inflation is stickier. This time last year we thought interest rates were going to come down. That was a projection. Now it didn't come down. They didn't come down as much as people thought. Now it's pretty sticky, and people are talking about hikes, or the possibility of hikes in the US. And the 10-year Treasury is at close to 5%. So interest rates are going to be higher. And therefore, two things I think really become important. The first is you have to pick your geographies like India for growth. And the second thing is you have to use, in parts of the world where growth is not as great, like Europe, we're under pressure, UK under pressure, France, Germany, you have to use AI, quantum computing, the metaverse, blockchain to improve efficiency. So those are the two things I think that are top of the agenda for people trying to run mini global companies like we are, like I am, and others. So pick your geographies and use the amazing advances in technology to improve efficiency and effectiveness. So it's a very different world to the last 30 or 40 years. I'm old enough to be able to reflect on that, and I think it's the three big issues geopolitically are US-China relationships, or lack of them, and I think that's going to bifurcate still further with Trump. To be fair, it was true of Biden, it was true of Obama. It started to shift after the Clinton years with Obama. I think that's one. The second, of course, is Russia and Ukraine. If there is an agreement over Ukraine, will Russia check, or will Russia go further in time? And the third thing is Iran. I think the Trump administration will be good news for the Middle East. We had good news over the weekend. As a Jew, I was delighted to see the release of some hostages. I want the rest to come home as rapidly as possible. A ceasefire, at least temporarily, in Gaza is also a good thing. But I think the Trump administration and its relationship with Saudi and the Middle East generally, with Qatar and elsewhere, bodes well for better for the Middle East than we've seen before, and maybe we'll see a little bit more. Maybe the Saudis will normalize relationships with Israel. Maybe we'll have some form of political resolution of the problems around Palestine and the West Bank. And maybe I'm a little bit more optimistic about that. But the first two, I think, are very, very difficult issues to deal with. US-China relationships, which I think, as I said, will bifurcate even more. And the second around Russia and Ukraine and Eastern Europe.
Right. Do you think fora like the World Economic Forum will still be relevant in an era of Trump, because he's pushing for America first? There's expected to, be a hark back to the industrial policy era. What do you make of that?
Well, my sense is that Davos this year is probably, we've got the counter pull of the inauguration, and I think some people are managing somehow to do both. Right. But some have chosen one or the other. I think the attendance this year, my sense is it's pretty strong this year. I'm talking to people on the airlines, for example. The inbound is as strong as it was pre-COVID, so it's picked up. So I think people do see this as an event but the off-conference, the promenade, and all the activities off-conference. Somebody said to me just now that there's an event organized by one of the media companies with an educational institution on Wednesday, and there's a full program on Wednesday, and why should he bother to go to the conference? So the conference has lost its importance, actually, in terms of the sessions. It's become a sort of super, not inexpensive, it's become more and more expensive networking event, but it is a super efficient way of seeing a lot of people very quickly in a short period of time. So as a networking, but it's the same people going to the many events. I mean, probably the last thing we need is more events, but it is the same people going to these events. But I think in its early days it was extremely effective. We were talking about some of the earlier
Right.
political, around Cyprus, around Palestine, Yasser Arafat. In those days, there clearly was a high profile. But look, President Trump, who will be president by then again for the second time, will be addressing the conference
On Thursday.
yeah,
Right.
I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, and so that will be he will be top of the agenda. He will be delighted to know that everybody is talking about him, and he does dominate the agenda.
Right. When we met last year, Sir Martin Sorrell, you told us that you're a raging India bull.
I remain a
And-
raging bull. I mean, listen, Borga Brenda has caught up with us. I think it was on your channel, so another Indian channel. He said India will account for 20% of worldwide growth.
Right.
The new China.
And you also mentioned, this was before the Indian elections,
Yeah.
that Modi will be re-elected
Yes.
and that he will be good
Modi
for
unders-
India. So
Modi
that
from
prediction
Florida.
came true.
Yeah,
Modi's
he
back
understands
as prime
branding.
minister.
He understands branding. He's a great ad man.
What do you make of Modi's third term?
Well, I think India is front and center. I mean, you have, we're talking about the forum here. Indian representation is very strong. You look at the inauguration, Indian representation is extremely strong too. So the Indian oligarchs, that's the fashionable phrase now, are extremely strong, not only in India, but increasingly abroad. And, India, the projections are that by 2050, India will be the third largest economy in the world. It's already the most populous economy in the world. Its birth rate, although it is, I think, coming down, is still strong enough to increase the population. You know what people say about China is the 1.3, 1.4 billion. China will, by the end of the century, it'll be 770 million. I think that's on the low side. But India, they're forecasting a doubling. It won't double, but it'll be up. So, I remain, but not remain, I'm an increasingly raging Indian bull.
Great. Let's talk about the advertising industry for a minute.
Yeah.
You had pretty strong views on the Omnicom takeover of
Me?
IPG. And we also saw the Publicis group, it's the largest holdco company. It recently merged two agencies to call
I
it
think Arthur Sadoun bought
Leo.
80,000 sweatshirts with Top Dog on
Are
it.
we going to see more consolidation happening in the
Well,
advertising industry?
I think that's
Will
a really-
consultants like Accenture perhaps
No, I don't
buy
think so-
up more agencies.
No,
in
I
this
don't think so much Accenture, but I think the strong will devour the weak. Okay, so I think what you will have, you've got 6 holding companies, which will be reduced to 5 if the IPG Omnicom deal goes through. The Omnicom share price has come off by about 17%. Shareholders are a bit bemused by it, obviously. Maybe it'll go through, but it's going to result in a lot of redundancies. I mean, the synergies, the so-called synergies, which actually is a euphemism for redundancies, the number of people will go from 127,500, my guess, to about 110,000. So you'll see synergies at least double to what they're saying they will achieve. But this is a reflection of the strong, and the 2 strong holding companies are Publicis and Omnicom. Omnicom is devouring IPG. Omnicom devouring IPG. Publicis might devour parts of Dentsu, which is one of the weak ones. WPP, also one of the weak ones. And IPG, as I say, has gone. So I think probably the 6 we know will go to 5. I think the 5 could go to 4. And I think the 4 could actually go to 3. I think you could end up with Omnicom and Publicis as 2 of them, and maybe Havas and Dentsu get together. Havas now is separate. Its market value it looks cheap from the outside. It's not been as strong as people forecast when they did the restructuring and splitting up of Vivendi. And there's a strong argument to say the Japanese really are suffering outside Japan with Dentsu, and a merger between Havas and Dentsu International would make sense. And maybe Publicis can sort of pick up some pieces of WPP as that's dismembered, which I think in the fullness of time it probably will be. I mean, WPP is in an extremely weak position. I mean, this morning, Bain Capital announced the sale of Kantar Media to HIG Capital, a private equity company, for $1 billion. The $1 billion doesn't flow through to WPP, it flows through to Kantar. It strengthens Kantar's balance sheet, and maybe there'll be a distribution to WPP. But all the asset sales that WPP has made, which were to reduce debt is now greater than it was 2 or 3 years ago. So for all this talk about simplification and debt reduction, they haven't achieved anything. So you've got basically 2 very strong companies, 4 weaker companies. IPG sold on weakness.
Right.
I mean, they lost Coke, they lost General Motors, they lost Amazon, they lost Pfizer, they lost J&J. I mean, huge. No analyst, no journalist, with all due respect, has sat down and analysed how much business IPG lost over the last 3 or 4 years. It must total, in revenue terms, at least $1.5 billion. It's huge. And ironically, the GM and Coke loss removed 2 of the big conflicts, because Omnicom has Pepsi and they won't live even in the same holding company. So basically, the strong will consume the weak.
Right. Tell us about S4 Capital's plans for India. What are you planning to do?
Well, we've got a small operation in New Delhi, and we're very keen to expand it still further. I think we're very keen to see how we can expand it to even greater. The Indian advertising market is very vibrant, as you know. Still actually dominated by traditional media, not as untraditional as digital. The world is about 70% digital now. It's about $1 trillion of spend in the world, and 700 billion is digital and 300 billion is traditional. The traditional piece is declining, going down by about 0 to 5% if you've got live sports. If you don't have live sports, going down 5, 10, 15%. Digital continues to grow at 10 or 15%. And actually the streamers are now, like Netflix and others, have caught on to the strength of and imports of sport like the IPL, which India twigged a long, long time ago. There'll be some interesting changes in that area, as you well know. So I'm very bullish not only on India, but the Indian advertising market too. And the 2 work in tandem. If corporate profits are strong, which they are in India, advertising is strong. There's a direct correlation. That's probably the tightest correlation that exists. So a vibrant India means a vibrant Indian advertising market. And the Indians are very strong technologically, and therefore they've woken up to the importance of digital communication. They'll wake up even more to it in the future.
Great. Before I let you go, I have to ask you, how are you using AI in your daily life? Do you have any go-to AI apps?
Yeah, well, I use Gemini too. And I do. Actually, very funny. It's a very funny story. So I was with our brokers. We were having a New Year lunch, and we were talking to the analyst, and we were talking about it. So I said, well, I will instantly write a buy circular and a sell circular on S4. And I went to Gemini, and literally in 10 seconds, I had the buy circular, and I had the sell one as well. So it is amazing. It is amazing. But the answer is, from an industrial point of view, visualization and copywriting, personalization at scale, hyper-personalization at scale, second area, media planning and buying, general efficiency, and then last but not least, democratizing knowledge inside companies. Those 5 areas are areas that are affecting our industrial lives, our advertising lives all the time, particularly the first 3. So changing the speed with which we get advertising to market, super quick now. Personalizing at a scale we never thought possible. I mean, we might produce for a Netflix campaign 1.5 million assets before. Now we can do multiples of that on an individualized basis. Media planning and buying, which is the guts of those holding companies that we were talking about for a minute. That's the driver, the profit driver. I think that industry employs about 250,000 people. There are not going to be 250,000 people driving that in the future. It's going to be much less. So algorithms. I mean, in the investment business, the equity investment business, for example, and PE, you don't use manual systems or semi-manual systems like we do in the advertising business. And if you think about that $1 trillion that clients spend, that should be analyzed algorithmically. And the outputs will be far superior, which a 25-year-old media planner or buyer will be able to use much more effectively than trying to do it himself or herself.
Great. On that note, thank you very
Thank you
much
very
for
much.
talking to
Good.
Money
Nice to
Control.
see you.